What if I told you that your tiny home lot, the same lot most people dismiss as too small to matter, could be quietly erasing 50% of your grocery bill every single year? Not with some expensive hydroponic tech lab, not with a second mortgage, with dirt, sunlight, and a design system that most homeowners have never even heard of. Here is the reality check. The average American goes through roughly 155 pounds of fresh vegetables every single year per person. And right now in mid-2026, the fresh produce index is still volatile. Fresh produce prices remain above their historical average growth rate, driven by specialized labor costs and water rights reallocations in the Central Valley. Vegetables are not getting cheaper, and that single 1-ounce clamshell of organic basil at your local grocery store, it is now averaging $5.49 to $6.25 in most urban markets for 1 ounce of basil. But here is what is wild. Researchers at Ecology Action and the Grow Biointensive program have documented that a single person committed to intensive growing methods can meet most of their vegetable needs in as little as 50 to 60 square meters. That is about 540 to 650 square feet. A typical tiny home lot is almost always larger than that. So the math works. The question is just whether you have the right design. That is exactly what this video is about. I'm going to walk you through a complete zone-by-zone edible landscape plan built specifically for tiny home lots. The crops, the layouts, the yields, and the honest numbers. No hype, no guesswork. Before we dive in, if you're new here, this channel is all about honest, research-backed content on tiny homes and alternative living. So hit subscribe and tap the bell. And stick with me to the end of this video, because in the final section, I'm going to reveal the one plant zone that most tiny home gardeners completely skip, and it is the one that delivers the highest calorie return per square foot on the entire lot. You do not want to miss that. Let us start with the numbers, because I want you to feel the weight of this opportunity before we get into design. In 2026, edible landscaping is one of the top gardening trends of the year, and it is not a trend driven by aesthetics. It is driven by grocery receipts. The USDA data confirms it. Fresh produce prices remain elevated. Water supply disruptions in key growing regions are keeping pressure on supply. And the research is clear that growing your own food at home, even partially, delivers real, measurable financial returns. Now here is one of the most well-documented examples in U.S. urban homesteading. A family operating on just 1/10 of an acre in Pasadena, California. Using edible landscaping in the front yard and intensive raised beds in the backyard, that property produces between 6,000 and 7,000 pounds of food per year. On a city lot. I'm not promising that for your property. That is an exceptional setup with years of soil building behind it. But it proves the ceiling is high when the design is intentional. For our purposes, a typical tiny home lot between 2,000 and 5,000 square feet. Here is the realistic math. Most tiny home lots run 0.05 to 0.15 acres. Even at the smallest end, roughly 2,100 square feet, if you subtract the home footprint of around 400 square feet, you are left with approximately 1,700 square feet of workable lot. That is nearly 3 times the 540 to 650 square feet that biointensive research says you need to cover one person's vegetable needs. The math is solidly in your favor. A well-planned, edible landscape on that lot can realistically cover 50% of 1 or 2 people's annual vegetable consumption. Based on that USDA per-person figure of around 155 pounds of fresh vegetables per year, you are aiming to grow roughly 75 to 160 pounds annually, depending on your household size. With the right layout, that is not just achievable, it is repeatable year after year. Here's how we get there. The core philosophy of an edible landscape is simple. Every inch of your lot should be doing double or triple duty. Beauty and food production. Privacy screening and food production. Shade and food production. Nothing is wasted. To make that happen without chaos, we use a zone-based design approach. Think of your tiny lot as 5 distinct zones radiating outward from your front door. Let me walk you through each one. Zone 1. The doorstep zone. 0 to 5 feet from entry. This is the highest maintenance zone, but it is also the most convenient. Containers, window boxes, and small raised planters right at arm's reach. What grows here? Herbs. Always herbs. basil, thyme, rosemary, parsley, chives, mint, and keep them in a container or it will take over your entire lot. Here is the financial case for herbs in 2026. A single organic basil plant costing $4 at a garden center will produce well over $100 of harvest value over a season, at current retail prices of $5 to $6 per ounce. That is not a gardening hobby. That is a 25-to-1 return on a $4 investment. Zone 1 also works well for compact lettuce varieties, cherry tomatoes in large pots, and dwarf pepper plants. Cherry tomatoes alone can yield around 6 pounds per square foot over a growing season. That adds up fast. Maintenance level, daily or near daily attention. These are your high-touch plants, but they are right at your door, so it is effortless to check on them. Zone 2, the productive perimeter, 5 to 15 feet from the home. This is the engine room of your edible landscape. Zone 2 is where your raised beds live, and if you only focus on one zone, make it this one. Raised beds with quality amended soil produce significantly more per square foot than in-ground row planting because soil quality is controlled and compaction is eliminated. A 4 by 8 foot raised bed, just 32 square feet, is a serious food producer when planted strategically. 2026 material update. Important. If you are planning to build cedar beds, check current pricing first. Cedar costs spiked in early 2026. The more affordable alternatives this year are composite, ACQ-treated pine, or galvanized steel livestock troughs. The galvanized steel troughs in particular have become popular in the tiny home community because they are durable, they last decades, they drain well, and they look sharp. A 2 by 8 foot galvanized trough runs considerably less than cedar at current prices and requires zero maintenance. 2026 tech update. Self-wicking beds. The gold standard for Zone 2 in 2026 is the self-wicking raised bed, also called a subrogation bed. These beds have a water reservoir built into the base. The growing medium draws water upward by capillary action as the plant needs it, which means you are watering from below, not above. Self-wicking beds reduce watering frequency by approximately 70% compared to standard raised beds. For a tiny homeowner who travels, works long hours, or wants to minimize daily garden chores, this is a game-changing upgrade. You can fill the reservoir every few days rather than watering daily. For a tiny home lot, I recommend starting with 2 to 4 raised beds, each 4 feet wide, so you can reach the center from either side without stepping in, and 8 feet long. That gives you 64 to 128 square feet of prime growing space. Best crops for Zone 2 raised beds: tomatoes, peppers, snap beans, Swiss chard, cucumbers train up a trellis, carrots, kale, and beets. Here is the paradox that surprises most people. They think more soil equals more food. It is actually the opposite. On a tiny lot, the more you limit the root space with intensive raised beds, the more the plant focuses its energy on producing fruit rather than wandering roots. You are not restricting the plant. You are directing it. Honest yield numbers from published square foot gardening data. Tomatoes, approximately 9 pounds per square foot over a season. Cherry tomatoes, approximately 6 pounds per square foot. Snap beans, approximately 2 pounds per square foot. Carrots, approximately 16 carrots per square foot. Kale and Swiss chard, continuous cut and come again harvest from the same plant, often for 7 months or longer. The trellis is non-negotiable in Zone 2. Growing cucumbers, peas, beans, and indeterminate tomatoes vertically takes production off the ground plane and onto a vertical surface, effectively doubling the productive capacity of a small footprint without adding a single square foot of bed space. Maintenance level: 2 to 3 times per week during peak season. Watering is largely handled by the self-wicking system. You're mostly harvesting. Zone 3. The edible border, paths, edges, and ornamental beds. This is where edible landscaping really separates itself from a standard vegetable garden. And it is the zone that is exploding in 2026. Designers and homeowners are calling it edimental planting, plants that are both ornamental and edible. Instead of planting purely decorative shrubs and flowers along your paths and borders, you replace or mix them with plants that are beautiful and edible at the same time. Picture this: deep purple kale as a structural focal point next to bright zinnias. Creeping thyme filling the gaps in a stone walkway. nasturtiums cascading over the edge of a raised border. They are beautiful, they are edible, and they attract pollinators that increase yields in every other zone on your lot. Rainbow chard with brilliant stems in red, yellow, and orange. Blueberry bushes that look gorgeous in fall foliage and give you fruit in summer. Other high performers for Zone 3. Rosemary as a low hedge, fennel as a tall feathery backdrop, strawberries as ground cover along pathways, and artichokes as dramatic architectural focal points that also produce one of the most expensive vegetables in the grocery store. 2026 microclimate tip. Zone 3 is also where you exploit the thermal mass of your tiny home. The south-facing wall and foundation of your tiny home absorbs heat during the day and radiates it at night, creating a microclimate that runs warmer than the rest of your lot. Use this zone to grow plants that are technically 1 USDA hardiness zone warmer than your location. Citrus in Zone 8, figs in Zone 7, or peppers that produce longer in the fall than they otherwise would. Your tiny home is acting as a passive heat source for your garden. Maintenance level, low to moderate. Most of these are established perennials or self-seeding annuals that need minimal intervention once settled. Zone 4, the canopy layer, trees, tall shrubs, vertical structures. Zone 4 is a long game. This is where you think in years, not seasons. And it is where permanent, high-value food production comes from. 2026 viral plant alert, columnar apple trees. If you have not heard of these yet, you will. Unlike standard dwarf apple trees that spread 6 to 10 feet wide, columnar apple varieties stay just 2 feet wide and grow 8 feet tall. They look like a green column. They produce full-size apples, and they fit in places where no conventional fruit tree would ever work: a narrow side yard, a fence line, even a large container on a deck. A single columnar apple in a 2-foot footprint producing 20 to 30 pounds of apples annually is one of the most efficient food-producing plants available for a tiny lot in 2026. For the smallest lots, also consider espalier training, a centuries-old technique where fruit trees are trained to grow flat against a fence or wall in a 2-dimensional plane. A properly espaliered apple or pear tree can produce substantial yields in a horizontal footprint of just 2 to 3 feet. It looks stunning. It screens an ugly fence, and it produces food. Berry bushes fill the mid-level in Zone 4. Blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, and currants are all extremely productive per square foot, require minimal maintenance once established, and are genuinely expensive at retail. A single established blueberry bush can produce 5 to 10 pounds of berries annually. Zone 4 is also where you site a pergola with kiwi vines or grapevines, which creates shade for the tiny home while producing fruit overhead. Agrivoltaics bonus. If you have solar panels on your tiny home or a pergola structure, 2026 research on agrivoltaics, growing food under or alongside solar panels, shows that certain crops actually thrive in the partial shade created by panels. Lettuces, spinach, kale, and herbs perform well under solar arrays, and the panels benefit from slightly cooler temperatures. If you are running solar on your tiny home, your panels and your garden can work together rather than compete for space. Maintenance level, low once established. The first year requires attentive watering and care. After that, seasonal pruning and harvesting. Zone 5, the forgotten zone, foundation plantings, fence lines, awkward corners. Every tiny lot has dead zones. The strip of soil along the fence, the shady corner by the foundation, the awkward sliver between the home and the property line. Most homeowners fill these with mulch and forget about them. Zone 5 is about activating those dead zones for food production. Shady areas, plant garlic, sorrel, mint in containers, lemon balm, and shade-tolerant lettuces. Many lettuces actually prefer partial shade in hot climates. It prevents bolting and extends the harvest season significantly. Fence lines, string wire and grow pole beans, peas, or cucumbers vertically along the entire fence. A standard 20-foot fence line can support a continuous wall of beans all season long with almost no ground footprint. Foundation beds. These often have builder-amended soil. Plant perennial herbs here. Chives, oregano, thyme, and sage come back every year with almost zero care. Hot dry corners near concrete, perfect for Mediterranean herbs and hot peppers, which thrive with heat reflection and good drainage. Let us get honest and specific here because I think a lot of gardening content glosses over the real numbers, and that is not helpful. The USDA data tells us the average American consumes approximately 155 pounds of fresh vegetables per year per person. For our 50% target, you need to grow approximately 77 to 80 pounds of fresh vegetables to hit that mark for one person. Is that a lot? Let's put it in perspective. 2 4x8 raised beds, 64 square feet total, planted in a rotated mix of tomatoes, snap beans, kale, and carrots can reasonably produce 80 to 150 pounds of vegetables in a single season in most U.S. climate zones. That is from Zone 2 alone. Add Zone 1's herbs, which are worth more per dollar saved than almost anything else you can grow. Add Zone 3's edimentals and perennial greens, and add Zone 5's fence-line beans, and your total productive output climbs well beyond that baseline. Why do I say 50% and not 100%? Because I want to give you a number that is honest and achievable without perfect conditions. Your first year will be a learning year. Your soil will improve. Your skills will sharpen. Some seasons will underperform. Climate matters enormously. A gardener in USDA's Zone 9 in coastal California can grow food 12 months a year, while a gardener in Zone 4 in Vermont has a 90 to 120-day frost-free window. Those are not the same situation, and pretending otherwise would not be honest. But here is what is consistent across the research. Plant-forward, intensive growing methods on even a small lot can achieve near self-sufficiency for vegetables for 1 to 2 people. 50% is not a stretch goal. It is a conservative, realistic target for anyone who commits to this zone design system and invests in their soil. And the financial impact is real. At 2026 grocery prices, with organic basil at $6 per ounce and specialty greens pushing $8 per bag, growing 75 to 150 pounds of high-value crops at home can represent several $100s in annual savings from a tiny lot. Year after year after year. You can have the most beautiful zone design in the world, but if your soil is poor and your watering is inconsistent, you will struggle. Let us talk about the 2 fundamentals that separate productive, edible landscapes from frustrating ones. Soil, the foundation of everything. Soil quality is the single biggest variable in how much food your lot produces. Multiple published sources, from University Extension Services to Mel Bartholomew's Square Foot Gardening Research to John Javance's Grow Biointensive program, all point to the same conclusion. Yields in rich amended organic soil can be exponentially higher than yields in native soil, especially on lots where builders have stripped or compacted the topsoil. For raised beds, use a blend of 1/3 compost, 1/3 peat moss or coconut coir, and 1/3 coarse vermiculite. This is often called Mel's Mix, and it has decades of documented performance. It drains well, holds nutrients, never compacts, and can be refreshed with compost each season indefinitely. For in-ground zones 3 and 5, work in 3 to 4 inches of compost before planting, and mulch heavily with wood chips or straw around perennials. The mulch feeds soil biology, suppresses weeds, and retains moisture, doing 3 jobs at once. Start composting immediately if you have not already. Kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, cardboard, yard waste, all of it becomes free soil amendment. A simple 2-bin compost system takes up about 6 square feet and pays for itself within months. Water, the #1 killer of small gardens. Hard truth. Inconsistent watering is the #1 reason small food gardens fail. Not pests, not disease. Inconsistent watering. For Zone 2, the self-wicking raised bed system I mentioned earlier handles most of this problem automatically. You fill the reservoir every few days, and the system delivers moisture to the root zone exactly when the plant needs it, eliminating both overwatering and underwatering simultaneously. For Zones 3, 4, and 5, pair drip irrigation lines with a timer. Drip delivers water directly to the root zone, eliminates splash that spreads disease, and dramatically reduces water consumption compared to overhead watering. For reference, hydroponic systems use up to 90% less water than traditional farming. Drip irrigation on raised beds will not match that ratio, but it dramatically outperforms any overhead watering method. Also worth serious consideration, rain barrels, depending on your local zoning. And yes, Some municipalities regulate rainwater collection, so check before you install. A simple 50 to 100 gallon barrel connected to your downspout can provide meaningful free irrigation water during dry stretches. Several barrels linked in series can supply hundreds of gallons from a single good rainstorm. In drought-prone climates, also consider building moisture-retaining swales or sunken beds in zones 3 and 5 that capture and hold water in the soil rather than letting it run off the lot. Not all vegetables are equal when it comes to space efficiency and financial return. Here are the crops I would prioritize in any tiny home edible landscape, organized into 3 tiers by value per square foot. Tier 1. Plant these first, highest return. Herbs: basil, parsley, cilantro, thyme, oregano, and rosemary. At current 2026 retail prices, fresh herbs are the single best investment in a small food garden. A $4 basil plant produces $100 or more of value. A rosemary bush produces for years. These go in Zone 1 and Zone 5 foundation beds, and they never stop giving. Cherry tomatoes, roughly 6 pounds per square foot, continuous harvest all season, and premium priced at the store. Trellis them vertically in Zone 2. Kale and Swiss chard, cut and come again crops that produce continuously for months. Nutritionally dense, freeze beautifully for off-season use. Grow them as edimentals in Zone 3 borders and as workhorses in Zone 2 beds. Lettuce and mixed greens, 30 to 45 days from seed to table. Succession plant every 2 to 3 weeks for continuous harvest from spring through fall, and in mild climates, through winter with row cover. One of the fastest and most reliable return crops available. Tier 2. Plant these second, strong return, slightly more space needed. Pole beans and snap peas, vertical growers that produce prolifically from a narrow footprint. Beans also fix nitrogen in the soil, improving it for the next crop rotation. Peppers, slow to start, but an established plant produces heavily through summer and into fall. Bell peppers and specialty hot peppers are both expensive at retail and easy to overwinter indoors in a tiny home. Cucumbers, trained up a trellis. One healthy plant can yield 10 or more cucumbers in a season from a compact ground footprint. Zucchini and summer squash. Honestly, 2 plants will feed a household. They are extraordinarily productive and harvest frequently, sometimes daily at peak season. Tier 3. The long game. High value. Requires patience to establish. Blueberries. Initial investment in soil acidification, but a mature bush produces 5 to 10 pounds of berries annually for decades. One of the most expensive fruits at retail. One of the least demanding once established. Columnar apple trees, 2 feet wide, 8 feet tall, producing full-size apples. As mentioned earlier, the viral plan of 2026 for tiny lots and narrow spaces. Plant one on each side of a fence line, and you barely know they are there until harvest time. Asparagus. Takes 2 years before first harvest, but then produces for 20 years or more with almost no attention. Plant it once and harvest it for the rest of your time in the home. Perennial herbs, chives, sorrel, lemon balm, oregano, and thyme return every spring without replanting. These are true plant and forget-it food producers for Zone 5 foundation beds. Okay, I promise you at the start of this video the one zone that most tiny home gardeners completely skip, and that delivers the highest calorie return per square foot on the entire lot. Here it is. The vertical food wall. Not a trellis, not a fence vine. A fully intentional, designed vertical food wall using either a living wall planter system or a stacked pocket planter panel mounted directly to the side of your tiny home or a sunny fence, and planted exclusively with high-density crops. Here is why this is the most underutilized zone on any tiny home lot. The ground footprint is essentially zero. You are using vertical surface area that currently produces nothing. A 4-foot wide by 6-foot tall vertical planter system gives you 24 square feet of growing surface in a ground footprint of roughly 2 square feet. That is a 12 to 1 space efficiency ratio. What grows best on a vertical food wall in 2026? Strawberries and pocket planters. They hang beautifully and production is excellent. Lettuces and spinach. Their shallow root systems are perfect for vertical pockets. Herbs, particularly thyme and parsley. Compact pepper varieties. and dwarf tomato breeds like Tumbling Tom or Tiny Tim that have been specifically bred for container and vertical growing. In 2026, wall-mounted planters and modular pocket planter panels are more accessible and more affordable than ever. You do not need a custom installation. A few modular pocket planter panels, quality growing mix, and good afternoon sun, and you have activated a zone that most tiny homeowners walk past every single day without realizing what they are missing. The south-facing wall of your tiny home is prime growing real estate. The fence on the sunny side of your lot is prime growing real estate. Every south-facing vertical surface on your property has production potential that costs you nothing but a small setup investment. That is the real secret of the edible landscape. It sees value in surfaces that everyone else overlooks. Here is the takeaway from all of this. Your tiny home lot is not a limitation. It is a canvas. The research is consistent. The data is real. A household committed to intensive, zone-based edible landscaping on even a small urban lot can grow a meaningful percentage of their vegetable needs year after year, while creating a landscape that is more beautiful than a standard lawn, more ecologically valuable, and in 2026, significantly more financially intelligent. 50% of your vegetables from your own lot. With grocery prices where they are right now, that is not a lifestyle hobby. That is a serious financial and nutritional strategy. Start with Zone 2. 2 raised beds, galvanized steel, or composite pine to keep costs down. Self-Wicking if you can swing the upgrade. Get your soil right. Plant your Tier 1 crops. Build from there. The zones will fill in over seasons as you learn what works on your specific lot. If you found value in this video, subscribe. We cover this kind of practical, honest content every week. And check the playlist linked right here for everything else on tiny home living and affordable alternative housing. I will see you in the next one.